All right, so I've seen a lot of videos out there about how to set up a Minecraft server, but nobody's really asking how is the no, I'm joking. Nobody's really asking or showing you really what is a Minecraft server. How does the Minecraft server work? What are you doing when you set up the certain files on your computer in a very specific way? Now, let's say you're downloading. You go to the website and you download a .jar file. Actually, this is a really bad color. Let's pick a better color than this. We'll go a little darker. That's fine. A .jar file, Jar. Okay, usually this will be something like Minecraft.jar. All right. There's actually a few versions of these, but this .jar file essentially is all of the instructions that your computer needs to run Minecraft. Even if you're running a single-player version of Minecraft, which is usually just the client that you're booting up, the client itself is running technically its own server.jar file, its own internal server. Now, well, of course, that's just kind of how single player works. That's why you can actually open your world to LAN. You can open your world to other people, joining in on your single player world. It's actually fairly interesting the way they do it. But when you're dealing with this .jar file, you can actually see there's modifications of those .jar files. So you'll have things like spigot. I'm not going to write it all down, but there's a spigot.jar. There's also paper.jar. There is twinity.jar. All of these are just different ways that Minecraft itself runs. So you can take a look at, okay, this is where the size of the world is contained. This is where all the AI information is. This is where, like, literally, I guess the day-night cycle, the block structures, everything essentially is within this jar file. So if you modify it to a different one, just very slightly, then you can get something again like it's spigot or paper. Those are great examples of that, where they've tweaked the jar file just a little bit. And even though it runs with Minecraft, it runs with the client in the front. So you can imagine this is the client. It'll push it out to your computer screen, no problem. It actually has different rules going on in the back end. Okay, so what are you doing with this .jar file? When you initially download a .jar file, the computer doesn't know what to do with it. It will know that it's kind of like a Java system. If you can kind of see here, okay, it's .jar. This little extension at the very end tells you what type of program it's to be opened up in, but it doesn't know that it's like a server. It really doesn't know anything about it. So what we do with this is we actually create another file, which I'm going to call the boot file. Okay, boot file. Okay, and you'll see this a lot in like Windows. It's the .bat file, BAT. Okay, if you're running Linux, it's the .sh. I don't know anything about the I don't know anything about OS X, so we have to look into that. But basically, it's bat and .sh, and these files, you'll see inside them, usually you're putting something like Java. It starts it up. It says something like Java inside it, and then a bunch of instructions, and then you'll put the name of the .jar file in it, so the computer will read your bat file or your boot file, which could be your bat or your sh file, telling your computer to run this .jar file as like a server, as just its own Java system. Of course, you could click it to boot it. There's no problem with that. But this opens it up to, this is kind of just more of like ease of access, which it opens it up in a terminal or I can't remember, a console. So I'm not going to go into what those are and how those work, but that's what you're doing. That's why you're running one of these systems, which boots up this other system right here. Okay, so that's fairly interesting. The next thing you need to do is port forward. Now, what is a port forward? The internet actually runs on ports. So you could imagine, let's say you have google.com. I'm going to just use g.com. I'm going to use g.ca because I'm in Canada. Okay, you'll actually see these things that come after it, which is basically a colon and then some numbers, okay, that happen in this little area right here. So it'd be like 1, 2, 3. Okay, well, what's this? What is going on here? Well, if you connect to google.ca, google.ca actually has like a variety of different systems that you can connect to. So when you're connecting to the web page, you'll be connecting with one port. When you're connecting to Google with some other system, you could actually imagine, I don't know, it's kind of hard to explain if you're not super familiar with these things. But you could imagine that, let's say you have an IP address, and IP addresses are just, for those not familiar, they're just like home addresses. They tell you where on the internet things are. So if we have 1.1.1.1, right, and then we want to connect to the web page of this, we could have a specific port for it, which would be a number that comes off here. If we wanted to have a file server, then we'd have the same thing, a different port coming off here. If we wanted to run a Minecraft server, we could actually run a Minecraft, a file server, and a web server off of this exact same computer. That's all this is an address to a very specific computer with different ports for those different services. That's all ports are, is they're just like Google.ca. If there's different services, which Google has, you connect with a different port. So what are we doing with those ports? Port forwarding. Well, normally your router, which is that thing that sits in between you and your internet service provider, usually there's like antennas on it and stuff like that because it's a wireless router too or whatever. There's usually some things in the front. Okay. Your router doesn't allow anybody to connect from the outside. So I'll pick a better color. There we go. It doesn't allow people to connect from the outside because if I'm a hacker, I'm not going to draw that, but if I'm a hacker, then I will be able to get in using a port. So if you leave a port open, meaning someone can access it, well, then, I'm not going to send you, this device isn't going to send that hacker straight into your computer where your files are, where your .jar file and all the rest of your server files are. It doesn't matter what server type you're running, but that's all the same. Okay, but what port forwarding does is it actually says that, hey, if somebody's coming in with a very specific port, let's say for Minecraft, so let's pick a green here, they do connect, and they're connecting using, let's say, port number 1, okay? And we've designated that port number 1 is the one that is okay for people to connect to because they're connecting with Minecraft. Well, then it'll send port number 1 to a very specific computer, a very specific part, and then your computer inside this .jar file, well, the .jar file will generate a whole bunch of files with it, and you'll have a settings file. It's like a config file or a properties file. Those inside those files, those have the instructions that say, hey, keep an ear out. This is going to be my ear. Keep an ear on port number 1. Because if you hear somebody come in and the router pushes something in from port number 1 and says, hey, that's okay, we're going to have port number 1 here. There's a reason why there's no specific instructions how to do this, because every single router is different and they have different ways of port forwarding. So you're going to have to figure that out based upon your setup. But the cool thing is that now that we know this, we can actually have multiple .jar files. So let's say we have 2 servers .jar, okay? And let's say they're on one machine. And actually, let's pick a better color than this. All right. Yeah, they're on one machine like this. All right. You can have the different ones listen on different ports. So this guy will be listening on port 2. And anything that comes in through port 2 here will be pushed off. And this guy will hear it. It's a really, really cool system. So that's what we're doing when we're setting up a Minecraft server. And that's really all you need to do to set up most servers. To set up like an FTP server, or again, like a web server, or just any file server, or yeah, it doesn't really matter too much with that. Yeah, so that's kind of really cool. Now what you can do, we'll just make a few points on what's inside this .jar file. If we back everything out. So inside this .jar file, or essentially this .jar file will generate a whole bunch of files that are with it. So we'll just say there's a whole bunch of files here. Some of these files will be settings. Okay, some of these files will be, I'll put a wrench. Let's see if I can do that. That's my wrench. Okay, some of these files will actually be the world files. I'm going to put a map in. That's my map. Okay, these will be world files. All right, some of these files will be other plugins. Okay, sometimes there's plugins. We'll do this, and then I'll put a plug at the end of this. It'll generate all these files, so you'll be able to go in and modify these different systems. Now, this is really cool because computers are kind of interesting, and they can share files, and they can set different things up and use different systems and all that kind of cool stuff. And so really, you can come in here and pull pieces out and put pieces back in based upon what you want and how you want your server to run. Now, I'm not going to give the very specifics for how to do this because, again, there are way too many videos out there. But hopefully this gives you a very good perspective, or at least a larger perspective on what you're doing when you're running a server. And also, makes you feel a little more comfortable running your own server at your own house. I don't fully recommend having people like advertise servers that run on their own house, like run from their home and everything, because things like DDoS attacks, where you could imagine, let's say you have 100 little servers, and they're all trying to connect to this one .jar, this one specific server through port 1. Well, they can block your router. They can mess your router up because it's putting too much data through. If your router can handle it, then it'll mess your computer up because it's putting too much data through, and then there's a whole bunch of stuff that can go wrong. But you can still do it for fun, casually with your friends, and not have to worry so much about getting attacked. Especially since if you have like backups, that's a big thing too. All you'll be doing to back this up is you can just copy and paste this entire set of files in somewhere else. Now, some pros won't necessarily recommend that as not the easiest way to do things, but it is the most convenient way of doing things. So you can just grab that and copy it over and compress it somehow, and then you can actually create scripts and stuff like that auto copy it over. But that's the basics of setting up a server. What it is that we're doing, we're talking about port forwarding and running a server, how different servers run, and actually there's different systems too. So if you are running two .jar files on the same computer, you can actually bridge the two together with a different server, which is called bungee cord. I can go like this, bungee cord, okay, .jar. And what it does is it means that if you connect from the outside, like I'll do this really quickly, if you connect from the outside, okay, the bungee cord will send you to the specific jar, the server that it knows you want to go based upon having the entire group of servers on one network, rather than having to connect to each individual jar separately. So yeah, anyways, hope it's helped out. There's a lot to ramble on. But this is running a server.